Welcome to our discussion on tariffs as the hidden tax shaping 2026. In this presentation, we'll unpack how recent tariff moves translated into higher prices, strained supply chains, and tough choices for businesses and households, and we'll outline what policymakers and firms are doing in response as the economy adjusts to these new trade costs. The data show that tariff costs hit low-income families the hardest, with bottom-fifth households losing roughly 6% of income, middle households around 5%, and the top 1% only about 1.7%, meaning the relative burden on poorer families is roughly 4 times heavier, widening inequality and squeezing already tight household budgets. Tariffs have surged sharply, with applied rates jumping from near 1.5% to well over 15%, and an effective rate around 11%. The highest since the 1940s. Economically, this translates into eroding real wages, nearly a 1% hit to after-tax incomes, and downward pressure on long-run GDP growth, while costs feed into inflation. The promise of reshoring has flipped. Rising input costs and sinking export orders are forcing companies to rethink plans. The ISM employment gauge shows significant contraction at about 44%, and firms are announcing voluntary severance and headcount reductions across manufacturing, retail and energy as labor and input bills rise. Executives face heightened uncertainty greater than the pandemic in some reports, so firms are adapting with mitigation strategies like dual sourcing critical parts and rerouting freight to bypass affected corridors. But financially, most costs were absorbed internally in 2025, and roughly 20% is planned to be passed to consumers in 2026, amplifying inflation into next year. Sector impacts are broad and uneven. Primary duties of 25 to 50% hit steel, aluminum, furniture, and semiconductors hardest, while autos, copper, lumber, and cabinets face secondary pressure, creating broad economic strain. Specific cases like Apple face onshoring pressure with potential 25% cost shifts, and maritime fees such as $50 per ton charges on some vessels add direct escalation. Legal and export risks are piling up. IEEPA tariffs have been implemented, but lower federal courts flagged enforcement issues, and a Supreme Court decision is pending, creating uncertainty, while threatened U.S. export retaliation valued at over $200 billion. Targets agriculture, tech, and industrial machinery, exposing significant revenue and trade vulnerabilities. On revenue, tariffs initially produced a bump, but import volumes fell about 20%, and estimated tariff receipts stalled near $205 billion, while dynamic scoring shows a potential $500 billion shortfall compared with static projections. That trade-off leaves policymakers with 3 rough pathways: lift duties to revive trade, double down, and risk deeper downturns, or pivot to targeted relief. Domestically, tariffs act like a tax on consumers and firms by inflating costs, shrinking GDP, flattening job growth, and widening inequality, so reframing the debate matters. These are not foreign payments but domestic taxes that change real budgets and economic prospects, and understanding that shift is key to crafting realistic fiscal and trade responses.